everybody home at a good hour as well. I really appreciate you being here. My name's John Nolting. I'm about 3.5 months in as the athletic director here for the Steamboat Springs Winter Sports Club, and I'm really excited to be here. My background, just a little bit about me. Colorado's home for me, so it's great to be back here, but I came here after spending 6 years with the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Association at the headquarters for the U.S. Ski and Snowboard teams in Park City. I worked out there as the sport education director, so my charge was to focus primarily on coach education and train coaches through clinics across the country, working in clubs just like the Winter Sports Club. We brought in club development and invested resources and materials in helping educate and, in the process, certify clubs across the country. So we try to raise the standard of the product that we offer for athletes across the country. When I started out there at Park City, one of the things I said was important, that I felt that we needed to do a better job from the national governing body perspective, was to also address the parents. And so one of the things I really enjoyed during my time with USSA was traveling around across the country. As I do coaching clinics, I connect with the clubs and offer some parent education and parent information sessions as well to help spread that message. I was an alpine ski racer out of Winter Park growing up. I had great sport parents. I really felt that I had some great support, and I had a lot of freedom to make my choices in sport, and had a very rewarding athletic career. And I feel very privileged and lucky to be able to continue on working in this field and with that sport. I think that's really important. I've got 2 kids, so I'm in this with you. There'll be U14 and U12 athletes here in Winter Sports Club programs. And as a sport parent, I think it's hard. I think it's hard to really do the right things to fully support our kids so that they can have great success and enjoyment in what they do with sports. There are a lot of things culturally, particularly in the U.S., although my travels internationally, they're not unique to the U.S., but sport culture has gotten very professionalized. It's gotten, in some cases, very specialized. And it's a big deal. And there are components that make sport into things that I don't really think that it should be, but it's easy to get caught up and wrapped up in that, especially if we don't know. Hopefully, if you're here, you've seen some of our Parenting for Success articles that we've been putting out in the weekly newsletters. And I put copies on the table back there for everybody to grab if you haven't seen those and you'd like a copy to take a look at those on your way out. That's part of an effort to help get you all information that can help you work with your kids. It's a huge investment to be here. It's a huge investment in time. It's a huge investment in money. It's a huge investment in family resources and energy for your kids to participate in these programs. I would feel awful if we didn't arm you with some tools so that you can help make sure that with that investment, your kids are getting the most out of it. So that's why we're here, Parenting for Success. And as we tie it in with the Winter Sports Club's mission, which is listed down here below, to inspire the pursuit of excellence and empower members of our community to achieve their personal goals in athletics and life through participation in sport. The definition of success to me is that opportunity to pursue excellence with support behind you, with your full commitment, and get somewhere. Really legitimately have that chance to achieve your goals, whatever they are. And all of our kids' goals will be unique. And in that way, there are a lot of good lessons to be learned in sport. If we do the right things as parents, we can help our kids get the right learning from their participation in the sport. But again, it's not easy. There are a lot of little things that we can do to slip up along that way. So hopefully I'll be able to share some good ideas with you that'll help you in that regard. I'm curious if anybody was able to attend Greg Dale's presentation at the high school last night by chance. Fantastic. That's terrific. I heard it was really good. I was sorry I couldn't be there. We attended along with about 20 Winter Sports Club staff. We did a presentation for coaches, all the high school coaching staff, and we brought many coaches over on Monday and thought he did a great job. You probably hear some similar messages from that presentation. There are some specific ski and snowboard aspects that we'll talk about. But a lot of this, and the reason I wanted to start out here, is a lot of your kids might be in fall sports, and there's some things here that will be good things to take with not just their Winter Sports Club participation, but also what they're doing in the fall sports. But this is coming, hopefully. And this is what we do out there with our athletes and the support. And sometimes it makes you wonder, why in the world did I decide to be a ski or snowboard parent on those days that are tough out there? But I really believe, and of course I've been in, but I really believe that the lessons learned in skiing and snowboarding, just the nature of the sports, the aspects of dealing with, it's an individual sport on the mountain with a lot of variables and a lot of challenges that are difficult to foresee. It happens during the winter, right over the school year, which is good and bad from a life lessons perspective. When our kids handle that well and balance their academics with their athletics, they go through to college with such great tools that a lot of other student athletes don't have because they've had to play that juggling act. Dealing with hurling yourself downhill at 80 miles an hour and conquering that fear that comes along with it. Flying through the air for 100 meters and then having to strap on skis and test that engine for an endurance event. The terrain features and double cork, 1080, crazy tricks that we couldn't even imagine when we were skiing and riding that those athletes are doing now. To even work towards those, there's so many good, valuable lessons. So it's worth being out here on days like this and standing around instead of powder skiing and watch to support our kids. It's got to be worth it, right? So it'll really help if we understand what is our role, though, as we're out there. Because we here at the Winter Sports Club as staff and coaches, and my job here, a big part of it is to work with our coaching staff to elevate the level of programming we can provide for your kids. We have a very specific role with those coaches. You have a very specific role out there. And I would suggest to you that this is your #1 role out there as you're working with your kids in sport. It's unconditional love and support. Unconditional love and support means that it's not tied to results. It's not tied to their performance and what happens on competition day. That's not the job of my coaching staff. Our coaching staff has to be able to address those technical things that happen, the hands that are maybe back here, those things that didn't go right. It's a whole lot easier for our coaching staff to do that when our kids have the confidence and comfort that they're supported and they're loved at home by you all. So we'll talk a little bit about those different roles, but there's nobody else on the mountain whose job this is. So as parents, we better make sure that we take that one on. It's about making sure our kids know that we love them whether or not they win or lose. And a big part of this is from a coaching perspective, there are two types of motivations that we frequently see with young athletes. We see athletes that are really motivated to avoid failure. Or we have athletes that are really motivated to achieve success. If we as parents are really focused on results, outcomes, things that aren't fully within their control, if our love and support that we show to them after race day is based upon their result on that day, our kids need that from us, they're going to start to orient towards a fear of failure orientation. What happens when our kids are in this approach, when they're up there on the hill, we're inspecting some features in the terrain park for competition. And we've got some challenges. We've got some jumps that are really big. We've got some rails that are really tricky. We've got a course that's really turny in a really difficult spot. We have a Nordic venue that's got more hills than the kids have ever seen. When our kids when our kids fear failure because they're worried about those results. And we as coaches point out these things and we try to give them strategies to overcome those things. The fear of failure kids are starting to get tight. They're starting to get tense. They're looking at these challenges as ways that they can fail, and they tend to shut down. Their performance falters from it. Those that are motivated to seek success because they're comfortable with the support they're going to have from their parents, from their coaches, those around them, they see these challenges as opportunities. Those that fear failure can't do that. And a surefire way for us as parents to put our kids in that orientation is to overemphasize results. And we can do it without meaning to, and I'll talk about some ways that sometimes that can happen. As parents, and when our kids participate in sport, I talked about how it's become so professionalized. And it's become professionalized because maybe we're looking for safe things, programs to put our kids into. So they start into organized sport earlier. And then the kids show some promise, and the coaches all of a sudden get pretty excited and talk about that promise. And we get excited and get wrapped up into it. And we pursue these extra things. And this is happening at a pretty young age. But at the end of the day, skiing and riding, it's about fun. It's a game. It's a game that we can do on snow. We can't lose that perspective. So the number one reason our kids are doing this is to have fun. And fun means different things for each of them. One of the really valuable things we can do as parents is to understand what does make it fun for our kids. Some kids are really motivated by results. That can be dangerous. We can have some strategies to help them keep a broader perspective. Certainly results are important. And I really do like competition all the way down. It's just the messages that we send based off that competition that I'm more concerned with. But competition's a great thing. It's important. But they're doing sport to have fun. The other big reasons, and this comes out when we do studies with athletes across sport, across ages, it's fun, be with friends, and get better. It's not necessarily winning, but it's these three things. I'm really focused on the bottom one here at the club. If they have the upper two things and that's going really well, our expertise is driving at really improving their skills. That's an important thing for us to do. But it really starts with the kid, what the kid wants to do. And this is a really interesting study that I think, for me, it really brings things into perspective as a parent, not getting carried away into our kids' involvement with sport. Let me tell you what's going on here. So this is a study Gary McPherson did back about 20 years ago. And this is with musicians, but I think the concept applies with sport as well. They took a bunch of new musicians just learning an instrument, and they categorized them into three groups: a short-term commitment group, a medium-term commitment group, and a long-term commitment group. Short-term commitment group said, yeah, I think I'm going to try the saxophone, but I don't know if I'm going to really stick with it all that long. The medium-term folks might have said, I might play the saxophone through middle school, but yeah, we'll see where it goes from there. The long-term commitment group was, I want to play the saxophone on a rock and roll band, jazz band, throughout my years or wherever. And then they monitored how much these kids practice. A low amount of practice each week, moderate amount of practice, or high amount of practice. To me, this commitment group, this gives us some information as a parent. What's their intrinsic motivation to do this activity? Okay? So a couple things stand out for me when I look at this. On the vertical axis is a scale for performance, a way they can measure how well the musicians are doing. When we have not much practice, not surprisingly, the performance isn't all that great. But two things stand out. For the group that is not all that committed, I wonder if these are kids that they don't have a whole lot of intrinsic motivation yet. Maybe they're getting pushed by mom and dad to play this instrument. They do a ton of practice. They hardly push the bar and get better. The intrinsic motivation's got to come first. It's got to come from them. We as parents, if we're really excited about them being skiers or snowboarders or Nordic jumpers, and I hope that we are because they're amazing pursuits, then we can do things to make it attractive, to make it easy for them, to participate in those that they may catch on their own and get that intrinsic motivation where it would really take off. But we can't just give it to them. Maybe we had it, we can't just hand it to them. So, but by making the sport fun and doing fun things as a family, we can make it encouraging. Push them into that long-term commitment group that way. When they have the high commitment, look at the difference practice makes. 400% better improvement with the same amount of practice for those kids that are committed to it long-term. Now, I don't know with the aspects of sport whether we see that much of a difference, but the driving message for me is once our kids own it, that's when we can really work to get them that more practice and really push for that commitment. But if we push that commitment before they're really motivated to do it, from an investment perspective, if you want to take that approach, not a very good way to spend our money because we're hardly got any improvement on that performance scale. So the kids have to own it. And knowing that as a parent, when they kind of have that connection with the sport, is great. Here at Steamboat, it's one of the things I'm so excited about being here, is we've got an amazing Olympic heritage. There's a passion towards skiing and snowboarding, and we cherish our Olympic athletes. So for our kids to come into a room like this, to work with our coaching staff, hopefully when we have Olympians in town and we have those conversations, there's a lot more opportunity for those kids to catch that fire. And then hopefully when they catch that fire, if we're doing a good job as coaches here, then that performance can really take off. But until that fire's caught, we shouldn't. This is fine to participate in here, but boy, if as parents we're pushing an approach where we want to see results, that kind of thing, we shouldn't expect that without that passion. So it starts with their motivation. That athlete is committed to it. We have a support structure around that athlete here between you and then us as coaches. When it works really well, that you as the parents, along with the coaches, work together within the club and we support that athlete. The athlete always goes at the top of my triangle. I'll call this the parent-athlete-coach triangle. And these links here represent communication, important communication that goes on. Communication's a big deal for us as a club. When we did surveys at USSA with parents about their satisfaction with club, communication was always the hardest thing. Our sports are a little bit difficult. There's a lot of rules, selections, those things tough to understand. So we have to do a lot of communication. It's difficult. We're going to work hard to make sure we're doing a great job here. Specifically with your coach, your coaches should be communicating with you, obviously, the things like training plan, events detail, but also feedback on your child's progress. You should have that expectation that you can get that from your coach. Our coaches are giving you that information, or you can ask them that. Their progress and their attitude. A good thing to ask as a coach. I would love parents to ask, so how is Joey's attitude in practice today? That's stuff I would love to share, because we can work together on that if it's not on track. So we have that obligation with our coaching staff. As a parent, for it to work, for that triangle to work well to support our kids, we've got to support the coaches that are working with our kids. But it's also our obligation as a parent to make sure that our kids are with coaches that we can support. And this can sometimes be tricky. And it's my role to make sure that our coaches here at the Winter Sports Club are doing a good job. Our program directors do a great job recruiting quality coaches. It's a challenge for us to get great coaches. We have almost 100 coaches working down at all of our levels. Over the last couple of years, there's really been a significant effort at getting the resources directed to great coaches to achieve these goals for your athletes. But if you have a problem here, come talk to that program director, come talk to me. Let's work on that. A lot of times there's something that we can work on with that coach to make it a better relationship for you and your child. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the only way it's going to work good for your kid is if you can support that coach. So please, we've got an open door on this. This is kind of putting me out there, but it's so important because when we work behind the coach's back to try to make things better for our kids, it almost always ends up making things worse. So those communication channels are really important. This is a common thing that happens maybe after a bad performance when we get the triangle wrong and these communication pathways are wrong. And the athlete had a bad day. It's the coach's job, I put criticism there, that's a negative term, but it's our coach's job to constructively address what happened with the poor performance. And that's tough for an athlete to hear. When we as a parent try to put on that coach's hat, either because we can't help ourselves, and it happens, I've been there before, I know how hard it is, this is one of those things where we fall into that trap. We want to help our kids, so we pitch in some things that we saw out there that, boy, they can do better. Maybe it's the same thing Coach said, maybe it's something different. If it's the same thing, well, that's better, but we've got parent and coach piling on the kid, and confidence really suffers. If they're different messages from parent and coach, then we've got confused kid and not very confident kid. We've really got a challenge. So we want to avoid that situation. This is a much better situation where you're able to support that coach, you understand that coach, what that coach is going to do. Even though it's a bad race, you're providing that support to your kid. The coach, that helps their confidence. The coach gives that constructive criticism for them to work on things. They're much more likely to be able to take that and build that confidence. But if they're getting it from both of us, then we're in trouble. So, as a coach, I'm actively, and I'm trying to work with the parents as well. For me, if I know the parent is prone to put some criticism in there and overcoach, it puts me in a situation where if I want what's best for the kid, I'll back off on some of that feedback that I really should be giving because I'm concerned about the kid's confidence. And I want to get that first before I can build that up. So it essentially delays what I can do with that athlete, if that makes sense. So this is how we get the parent-coach-athlete triangle working well. And it's really important that this works. But it starts with your support of the coach, and I don't expect you to blindly support your coaches. You may know a lot about the sport, you may know nothing. Regardless of where you are in this spectrum, 6 really magic words you can use with your athletes. And it may seem corny, but I'm going to tell you, if we use these 6 words consistently, it is going to pay off and make a big difference. I love to watch you race, or I love to watch you ski. I love to watch you ride. I love to watch you jump. These 6 words are so powerful. They're not judgmental. They put us in the right frame of mind. And it really is amazing watching what our kids can do in our sports. If we think about messages like this after competition, one, it can help take us away from that pressure that we might have to go try to insert some coaching point or make some feedback. Really powerful words here. They make a big difference. My wife and I use them at home, and I think we've seen positive results. Praise is something that, as parents, we like to do. It makes us feel really good when we praise our kids with regard to their sport activity. And we absolutely should be praising our kids, but here too is where we can use praise in ways that we think are positive, that can actually have a negative outcome with our kids. Words have meaning, and we've got to be careful with some labels and some different things. So it feels good for us to praise, but we do have to be careful. If we praise too often, if praise becomes easy around our house, and this is true for skiing, snowboarding, it's true for school, it's true about anything. If praise is easy to get, then where's the motivation to work hard for praise? praise is an excellent tool for me as a coach to get the athletes to work harder. But it's got to be earned. It's got to be warranted. More praise equals more confidence. For the short term, perhaps. For the long term, no. If we continue to pile on praise and the kids aren't seeing improvement in results or performance, then they're going to start to tune that praise out, because obviously it doesn't match with the reality that they see. And confidence declines. And now all of a sudden, when praise is very warranted and well delivered, the athletes tuned it out because they don't believe it anymore. This is something I talk with coaches, making sure that we use this at the right point, that we can affect motivation and confidence, but as parents we can think about this too. We'll talk about the things that we can and we need to make sure that we do praise to really help out our kids. So praise when warranted, praise always when warranted. And the big thing is we're going to praise effort over performance, and I'll talk about why. And really emphasize what they can control, which in skiing and snowboarding and jumping, there are a lot of variables that are outside of our kids' control. And that plays a big effect on their results and so forth. So it's really important in these sports that we emphasize what they do have control over. Fantastic coach John Wooden, won 10 NCAA titles, 1.1, I think, 88 games in a row with his teams. This is a great thing to think about as a parent. Did I win? Did I lose? These are the wrong questions. The correct question is, did I give my best effort? So you may get beat, but you'll never lose. Something to think about with our kids. John Wooden's basketball players won an awful lot of basketball games, but he didn't talk about winning. He talked about effort. He talked about things that were within their control. So a great message to think about. The words are so important. Has anybody in here read the book Mindset by Carol Dweck? If you're in the club, it's a fantastic book, I think. And it talks about two different mindsets, a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. And these mindsets can be affected simply by some words that we use. And here's an example, one of the most fascinating studies that I've heard of. They took a group of 400 fifth graders and they gave them a simple puzzle test that the kids all could do a pretty good job on. And then they split that group down the middle based on their results, and so that the two groups were equal in their results on the quiz. And they brought each student in individually, and with one group they said, "Wow, you did really well. You must be really smart at this." The other group they brought in, they said, "Wow, you did really well. You must have worked really hard at this." So exact same scores, exact same statement, except one group was praised for being smart, one group was being praised for working hard. Then they brought those students in and they asked them, it said, "Everybody's going to take one more test. Would you like to take a harder test or one that's just like the one that you took?" The group that was praised for having worked hard overwhelmingly opted for that harder test. The group that was praised for being smart overwhelmingly opted for the same test. See, the smart group already had been given a label that they were smart, and they wanted to protect that at all costs. We think about that in athletics. How about that kid that we call talented or gifted, or that we call good at skier? All of a sudden that's a label. And the kids want to protect that label. They went ahead and they gave all the kids the harder test, and they all really struggled. The group that was praised for working hard when they gave them the initial score were kind of motivated and wanted to learn more. They wanted to review their test and see what questions they got wrong, see if they could learn. The group that was praised for being smart, very frustrated, had no interest in looking at it again, a little bit demoralized. Finally, they brought them all in and they did a test similar to the original test. And this is all in one session. This didn't happen over the course of a long period of time. And you might not be surprised that the results on that final test from the group that had been praised for working really hard did better. And the group that was praised for being smart did worse, but the difference was astounding. 30% better for the group that was praised for working hard, 20% worse for the group that was praised for being smart. See, the group that was praised for being smart had lost their confidence when they did poorly on the harder test. This happens in skiing and snowboarding all the time. Courses get harder, that kind of thing. And so then you have these variables in there. Kids didn't do any worse, but if they struggle, if they have to struggle more, and they have that label or over on their shoulder that says, I'm the good one, or I have this talent, and now I don't do so well, this loss of confidence leads to that loss of performance. Carol Dweck's group was so surprised with the results, they went ahead and they tested it 5 more times. They went from urban to rural, to different communities, different ethnicities, to make sure that these results were solid. In fact, all of their tests validated that result. From a simple statement, when they came to get those scores, you're really smart, a label, versus you must have worked really hard. Empowerment, giving them a message that there's something they can do about it. And I think that the carryover here in sport is very real. So we work to emphasize and focus on those things that our kids can control. There are some other words that we might use around the house related to our kids' participation in sport that can have similar effects. How about the sacrifice? The sacrifice, that first slide that I showed with everybody standing out there in the blizzard, that nasty day. The sacrifice for us to be there for that. The sacrifice that our family makes to spend $10,000 for our kids to go through the program with equipment, program fees, travel, and all those things, summer camps. The sacrifice that the kids have to miss school, or they miss a summer dance, or that kind of thing. Versus choice, because aren't we choosing to do those things? So when we use sacrifice, that automatically puts things in a negative light. But really, it's a choice that we're making. It's a hard choice, but it's a choice. Putting that positive frame on it. Failure versus setback. As a coach, I love failure because it's an opportunity to learn. Because I don't think it's indicative of what that athlete can do. So in reality, it's just a setback. It's not a failure when that kid has a poor performance, even if it's the last qualifier for the biggest event they've been shooting for the whole year. Because if I have a belief that my kid's going to want to continue to do it, it really is a setback because they'll learn something from it for next year. Criticism versus coaching. Again, that kid that's supported by you is going to be more receptive to coaching, so that when I, as a coach, give them that criticism that they need to hear, I'm not completely shooting down their confidence that's already been lost because they're down from what mom and dad has said. So absolutely we need to be critical sometimes in our coaching. We take a very positive approach with what we can, but sometimes that feedback can be perceived as criticism, especially when they feel that they're not getting that support at home. Tragedy versus disappointment. I can tell you there is no tragedy in our sports related to qualifications or selections or those kinds of things. Those aren't tragedies. Yes, they're disappointments when we had our kid that worked so hard and didn't make the Rocky Mountain Division team or whatever that is. But it's not a tragedy. It's a disappointment. Tragedy is reserved for some other things that hopefully we don't have to deal with too often. Difficulty versus challenge. Again, our athletes that are the best to work with don't really concern themselves with difficulties. They see those as challenges and opportunities for them to get better. And then finally, when our kids are done with their athletic career or in their pursuit, quit implies that they stopped in the middle of something. If I do ski racing for 10 years, enjoy it, maybe I didn't reach my goals, but I'm ready to go try something else, go to school, those kinds of things. I didn't quit ski racing, I ended. I finished that out. If we're talking to our kids about, making that decision at the end of the season, and we're using that word quit, then we're in trouble. If we're using the word sacrifice, I'm going to be more inclined to want to quit. If we talk about it in terms of choice, then I get to end on my own terms. Don't ever say quit around Bodie Miller, I hope his end isn't quite there yet. So think about those words that have meaning. And again, well-intentioned, but the differences can be substantial. And as parents, hopefully we're thinking about these things for our kids' performance. This is another place where we get ourselves in trouble, the scoreboard. The scoreboard is harsh in, again, a lot of our sports. We've got judge sports where the judge's determination is final and maybe was not indicative of what we saw, what the coaches saw, what our kids felt, and that's tough. But that's the way the sport is, and we've got to deal with that in a positive way so we can learn from it. We can always do better, right? And then in racing those events, there's so many factors that lead to the number that goes on that board. So the result ultimately has all these things that feed into it in our sports. And performance is just one. Our kids can control a lot of things about their performance, how they do what they do from the start to the finish of that event. Some of those factors are out of their control, but that's just one thing that goes into the result. There's snow conditions, the weather can change, their wax might have been off, other athletes may have performed really well, but our kids can't control those things. But we're a results-focused society, and it's in our nature, especially us as Americans. What we need to understand as parents, though, is there's so many things that go into this. Our kids are learning and developing still at this level. We should not expect our kids to be able to deal with all those variables and perform like the top level performers in their sport would at these younger ages. So let's help them focus on things within their performance that they have control over. Sometimes we chase results to extremes too in our sports, and I'll tell you because I've been on the other end of this. When the competition calendar comes out, it's a little bit different than the soccer team or the lacrosse team or the high school track team where there's meets that we go to or games that are on that schedule and everybody goes there to a team and we don't really have choices. Maybe we are going to choose to participate in a tournament or something, but we get in this mode where we assume that the calendar that comes out means kids need to go to every single one of those competitions. That's not necessarily true in skiing and snowboarding. There are some choices that we can make for particular events. But we should know why our kids are going to a particular competition. Because what often happens, and if your kids are young right now as they build up to U14, U16, kind of into those high school years, they'll end up faced with a lot of choices. And our coaches will work with them to come up with an athletic plan that makes sense on their calendar. In those early season coach meetings, you should have that conversation. You know, why is this event important? And don't feel like you're necessarily missing something if your athlete or the coach recommends that your athlete shouldn't go to a particular event because there's a good training opportunity at home. Competitions are fantastic, but the problem with competitions in our sports are that when we have a training day here at Howelson Hill or at Steamboat Resort, we get a lot of skiing and riding in. When we go to a competition day, usually that's cut in half or even more, that amount of practice. So that cuts down our practice time that our athletes can be getting better. Competition's fantastic, but if we do too much, we lose some valuable training time. Lots of competitions also expensive. But we know the best way to do it is to get a good training block, then compete, then have some recovery after. Our coaches will work on a calendar to try to do that. But what we often see, and sometimes it's pressure from parents, sometimes we see other families having success with this approach, but I liken it to throwing darts at a dartboard. If I gave you 20 darts, if I gave you an option of having 20 darts, and you had to stand back here and the dartboard was over there, I'll give you 20 darts to try to hit the bullseye 2 times. That would be one option. Or I'll give you 6 darts. You can stand right here. Which choice you're going to take? To me, the difference from there to there is training time and those opportunities and being fresh and not having to deal with some of those challenges that the scoreboard presents to you. But a lot of us want to take our chances with lots of darts, and that sometimes works out, but it's expensive, and it doesn't usually work out. And I'll give you an example for those of you Alpine families who might be familiar with Michaela Schifrin. As a 14-year-old athlete, which was her last year of racing before she got into FIS, and then she was off onto the national team and on the podium for World Cups just 2 years later, she raced in 11, she had 11 starts that season. It wasn't lots of competition that got her where she was. It was a lot of training. She skied over 130 days that year. That's a lot of quality training. You can bet she had competitive training days in there. But the nice thing about that is they had control. So just something to think about. This may not be a situation, those of you with young kids, you're not there yet, but keep this in mind, because I see, again, this is something where we see some groups do this, they get some initial success. It doesn't usually pan out. One of the problems with this is if we do lots of darts and we keep missing, that gets frustrating. So we can really get down to a spiral. When our kids get a good result versus a poor result, one thing for us to think about, are our actions any different? And take a minute to consider that with any sports. How do you treat that differently? And how does your child deal with those? And we should understand with our kids, this is a great place for us as parents to have some expectations in here with good results. Are they great sports persons? Do they, if they get called up to the podium, are they shaking the hands of the other kids on the podium? Are they thanking the organizers, that kind of thing? Or do they showboat a little bit? How do they talk about that good result? Do they talk about it with pride and say, yeah, I had a really great day today, and show that excitement, and say, I did okay. In fact, it was fantastic. Hardest competitors for me to compete with were the ones that were really positive about their results. The ones that did great and said, it kind of stunk. I got mad at them. I got mad at them. Those are things we watch. Poor results, it's natural for our kids to be disappointed, and that's okay. But we just provide support. Again, let them work through that on their own. If they're still lingering on that 2 days later, the next weekend, that's a problem we need to address. But if they're frustrated that whole car ride home, that's called normal for a lot. And a lot of our kids, if we stay out of their way, they'll be over it in 15 minutes. But the car ride home is really tough. So it's normal for them to be frustrated because they care. That's a good thing. But what we've got to do as parents is be careful that we don't get drugged down into that and start making excuses for them to try to help make them feel better, or to try to justify why they have that poor performance, or even start giving them those coaching points right away. That's not our job. Instead, give them supportive. Can you find something positive out of today? I thought you did a great job. It looked really strong to me. I noticed your energy this morning was fantastic. It's great that, point out some of the things that they did well. They might not hear you in that moment. They probably won't. But it's a whole lot better than the alternative messages you give them. So our actions should be the same regardless of those results. That goes with that unconditional love and support. If they put in that effort and they did those things leading up to that competition that were within their control, they should have done. We might have observed some things. Maybe they had a poor race day, and they were also out late the night before with their friends, and we noticed that they had a soda for breakfast and with a donut instead of a healthy breakfast, those kinds of things. Well, then absolutely it's within our point to point those things out, and as a coach, I would hope that you would, because those are things that we see at home. That helped lead to that poor result likely. The timing of that is important though. It's not going to be in the finish line or at the scoreboard, because that's not a time where the athlete's receptive to that message. It's not going to be in the car ride home, because if you start that, I guarantee you that your kid is thinking, see, they slowed down about 20. At 20, I could probably open the door and roll out. Wait until there's a time they're going to be receptive to that message. They're trapped in the car. That's not a good time to do the post-event analysis. Wait for maybe dinner when we get home the next day, but then we talk about it. Performance is in their control. It's not necessarily great results. So they performed really well. They did everything right, even if the result wasn't there. Go take them out for ice cream. Don't just take them out for ice cream when they got on the podium. That's another example of where it's well-meaning, but we're sending a message. Ice cream podium, they don't have full control of that outcome. Because I can tell you, I skied some great races where I didn't get on the podium. And I skied some lousy races where I did. Tied to that performance, if we just tie it to the outcome, it's not sending the right message. So we can mix it up. After poor performance, maybe ice cream is just what they need to help get over that. They did everything right in there. But give them time and that kind of thing. Another factor, sometimes it happens. After a great race, maybe Mom, you're at the event, Dad couldn't make it, Dad's at home. After that great race, they just got on the podium. Here's the phone, call Dad right away, let's tell him all about it. And after the poor race, we'll tell Dad when he gets home. No, let's call Dad every time after, so it's a habit. So it's not any different whether based on that result. Again, those things send that message. And think about what we're telling our kids versus what the coach is saying. The coaches will do that technical correction, but again, we might see some things that the coach can't see related to nutrition, homework. Maybe they were so stressed because they didn't do homework. I'm told to do those kinds of things. It's hard to be neutral with this, but this next message, this was a Facebook post. If I could have liked it 1,000,000 times, I would have. I won't read it aloud, but I'd like everybody to take the time to read it. What incredible perspective as a parent. I saw this Facebook post, and I know this person. It's one of the best Facebook posts I've read. This is an athlete who participated in the Youth Olympic Games, the first Youth Olympic Games, a very high-level athlete. And this particular event was extremely important for this athlete, and it had substantial qualification implications for this individual. But what a treat for this kid to be able to pursue his passion, his sport. And he continues to ski at a high level today, having this support behind him. He can focus entirely on the coaches without concern for things at home. So really, in this situation, when we think about our era, we want to post those things. Boy, it would have made, I'm sure it would have made him feel really good. It would have made me feel really good if I was down. If he's on that podium and he just won that event. Gosh, what a great thing to share with my friends, right? But this is really what it's all about. Really, honestly, and truly. So this is a great reflection on him and his son. So what do we do? Care. I'm so thankful that you're all here because it does mean that you care about your kids' participation, and that's so important. In my roles at USSA, I've worked with some amazing athletes that are setting international records right now and working with their parents. And all of those parents have a great deal of care. There are a lot of different examples for parenting that's gotten them to that point where they're at right now. But across the board, they care. There are a few examples where the unconditional love and support wasn't hit. And unfortunately, amazing athletes, pretty strained relationships with their parents. I don't want to go there as a parent for me. It's not worth it to that level. I see plenty of examples where that is there, and that's helped get that athlete to that next level. Talk process versus outcome and results. And the thing that's hard with this one is that our kids, especially in their teenage years, are not likely going to seem to hear what we're saying. But what happens is they come out after high school, maybe later on, and they realize and Dad were right. And while they didn't outwardly respond to those things that we say about the long term, continue to work hard, your effort will help get you there, those kinds of things, again, it beats any alternative message, and they are hearing you. Praise for effort, praise struggle. Struggle is good. Praise persistence. Despite setbacks, these are things we've got to really jump on and make a statement for. These are things that they can that are in their control. Talk with the coaches after an event and ask them what the coaches thought they did well, and reinforce that message at home. If you don't, all good things. Team up with the coaches. Like I said, if you and the coach can work as a team, it's going to be a good experience for your athlete. And then look for that intrinsic motivation when it's there. In a town like this, our kids have all the opportunity in the world. That's pretty cool. As a skier or snowboarder, if that catches and you're in this environment with a program like this supporting them, with you as parents supporting them, sky's the limit. It really is. Things to avoid those labels. You're smart, you're good, you're the next Bodie Miller, you're the next Michaela Schifrin. You're going to be our next Johnny Spillane in that mix. One thing that can be really good with is you can make a comparison, like, boy, you were racing really aggressively like we saw, or skiing really aggressive like we saw Pat Deneen in that last mogul event. We draw that comparison, but when we say you're the next so-and-so, all of a sudden that's a label that's putting pressure when the results don't match. That can be hard. So again, subtlety in our words, but be careful. And this doesn't just go for your kid. We think about this, and like your message might be great, but when our kids are doing really well down there by the scoreboard, you can bet the other parents are putting some labels on them, which we've got to help buffer that message a little bit. Keep them focused on still working hard, those kind of things. When kids do well when they're young, and they haven't really worked hard yet, and they start getting these labels, it's really hard to get those kids to start working hard when they need to, because they've had success without a whole lot of effort, unless that message is consistent with us at home and we're talking about things like that going that extra mile of practice, those kinds of things. Numbers on the scoreboard. This happens around qualification time. And we think we're geniuses, and we've counted out the results, and we've figured out in our head that if they finish 10th or better, that they're going to make it to the junior championships. So in all of our brilliance, we go up to our son or daughter and we say, so if you just ski to 10th place, we're going, we're making our trip to Squaw Valley, wherever it is. Okay, I got some coaches in the room. I've never heard a coach say, okay guys, this is how we ski to 10th. Okay, now this is how we ski to 5th. Okay, now this is, it's not how you compete in sport. It doesn't work. So, so those types of things, when we're doing those calculations, keeping yourself there of no help for the kids. The other thing with numbers, like when I talk to my kids after an event and I ask them how they did, and a lot of times our kids will come up, I got 6th. I'll say, no, tell me how you did. I'm not interested in the number. How'd you ski? How'd it feel? What was the best part of the course? Things like that. Telling me a number doesn't work. We don't talk numbers. The car ride home, again, we talked about that one. That's an awful place to do that coaching breakdown because usually the kids don't want it. Now, if they ask you, go ahead. Right? They've opened that door. But without that, they'll want to be opening the door and going out. And then conflicting messages. This is when we try to coach and we're saying things that are different from the coach. That is hard on our kids' confidence and really tough for them to filter through those messages. You really get to the root for our kids. There are questions we can ask. These are some great questions. They go a little bit deeper than how did you place today, that kind of thing. Do we know what our kids' goals are? Or are we thinking about our goals when we're talking about the kids? That's an important one. How much fun did you have? We keep emphasizing fun. And we know what's fun for our kids, and we make sure we get that. We tell our coaches, hey, my daughter really loves hitting the terrain park after training's over. And we really support her in doing that. So is that okay if she does that? We make sure that she gets that opportunity. Because that's what's really fun for her. Have those conversations. We ask our kids how good they think they are. And does that match up with really where they are? And then we can talk to them about that a little bit. Those goal setting some questions. Things I look for with athletes, especially any junior athletes at high school. In some of our sports, those talented athletes start to present themselves. Prior to that, they really don't. And I'm going to talk in a couple weeks, if you're able to come back and put some articles out there about some research that I've done as to young athletes that were the top of the country in their ranks, and what happened 5 years down the road. Did that pan out? Were the top athletes at that age the top performers later on? The results give us, they're just one part of many things. Things I look for is, what's the kid doing when training's over? Especially at a place like this. This is kind of like the backyard playground. We're up at the mountain. All of our training programs are over, so all our programs on the mountain, they're all over before the lifts close. Do our kids want to go ski ride some more before that lift's closed? Are they playing around on their skis here at house? Or are they right in the lodge when they're done and finished? They might have a great experience either way, but those kids that stick around out there, that's a sign for that intrinsic motivation that you can really jump on. How do they approach other sports? The athletes that are ultimately destined for greatness approach other sports with the same vigor and embracing challenge and all that as they do ski racing or snowboarding. And our sports, doing multiple sports for our kids really helps out their skiing and snowboarding. I mean, the skill set that they need to be skiers and riders and jumpers is so versatile that those other sports really contribute. If you're dragging them to another sport, maybe they don't do that. But a lot of our kids, they're playing on the soccer team, they're playing on the lacrosse team, maybe they're doing some hockey, those kinds of things. If they're playing hard on the rink and they're playing hard up here, they've got what it takes. Those are things that I really look at. How do they deal with a challenging situation? Those things are really important. But ultimately what they're doing with us in the Winter Sports Club, one thing that's unfortunate to me is that there's no such thing as a skiing or a snowboarding game. We don't talk about playing skiing or playing snowboarding. But really that's what it's about. That's what it starts at the younger ages. And I just wanted to share as we wrap up, this is one of our great former parents here at the Winter Sports Club, Jim Spillane. Many of you may be aware, his son Johnny came up through the program, 3 Olympic medals at the Vancouver 2010 Olympics, won the first medal ever in jumping Nordic combined for the U.S. And his perspective about how he approached Johnny's participation with the Winter Sports Club, I think, is really good. Hopefully everybody will be able to hear the audio's not super loud, but quick 30 seconds of some good approach.
You pull your kid aside and say, look, Johnny, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. This is a game you're playing here. And it's a game with all kinds of life lessons and all that, but there's plenty of ways to get life lessons. So if this one isn't working for you, well, we'll go find another one. And so all along the way, from day one, it was always Johnny's, Johnny owned the decision of whether or not he was.
There are a lot of programs here at the Winter Sports Club. Johnny participated not just in the jumping program, he did some alpine, he did some of those others. He had ownership of that, he had that passion. I interviewed, we had Jim come out, this was a presentation to clubs that he did while I was out at USSA. I interviewed Johnny after he won those medals at at the Olympics and talked to him about his junior development background, and he echoed the same thing. He said, I had the support from my parents to do whatever I wanted, and I had that freedom, and they supported me when it wasn't going well, and I never felt pushed to go one way or the other. Johnny owned it, and he made amazing achievements. We have a lot of choices here in our programs. Our kids can end up with a lot of different outcomes from their participation. Hopefully, they're all good. Maybe they're going to have a flag on the wall here. But chances are a whole lot more likely they're going to take those skills and apply them in a different field, perhaps continue on in sport. There are a lot of great avenues after their career. Maybe you'll have the enjoyment to celebrate like they did in that family. But again, that's not the only outcome. My goal here is to make sure that our programs in the community around here, the community support, the Olympic heritage that we have, that if our kids have this aspiration, we're going to give them the tools along with you to help them get there. And we're fortunate to be in that place. That's not the only outcome from the Winter Sports Club, but if they have that passion, that drive like Johnny did, that they can do those things. But we've got to understand our children's goals and support them in that way. I really appreciate everybody's time, and I'd be happy to take questions. My goal with these is we've got some specific program orientation meetings coming up over the next month. That's where we get some good specific questions relative to your child's program, and you can talk with those coaches on there. Again, establish that relationship with that coach. It's really helpful so that you can have that strong parent-athlete-coach triangle. We do have an opportunity on Monday, if anybody's interested. This is one that's always, you wish that you'd gone after something happens, but Dr. Dana Fitzgerald, who works for Pediatrics at Steamboat, will be here. She's going to be talking to our coaches, and you as parents are welcome, because we're going to talk about how we all need to work together to get a kid back from injury. Our sports are tough. If your kids pursue it for a long time at a high level, injury is likely at some point, hopefully not too serious. I'm one of few that my knees are original and everything's good. But that's an important one, and we always wish we'd done it after it happens with our kid. But that's an important thing. And then we'll continue with this in 2 weeks from now. I'll be back and talk specifically about some long-term athlete development. Talk about at each age, what are some important things, what are some things that we'll be working on with your kids, and ways that you can support your kid for their age group, for that long-term perspective. Because sport really pushes us, if we don't have that sense of what are the right things to do in a progressive fashion, sport pushes us to do stuff too early, too soon, that's detrimental for our kids' long-term potential. Looks really good in the short run, and we can't see that until it's too late. So we'll talk about that a little bit. I did, and maybe by a show of hands, you could let me know, obviously you're all here at 6. I have not put the time out for this one. By a show of hands, we'll have, tell me if 6 o'clock works well, or I was considering that while the kids are doing dry land, we could do 5 o'clock, but I know that's earlier for some of you that are just coming off of work. So by a show of hands, who would prefer a 5 o'clock, 5 to 6 on this? Okay. And everybody else, 6 works better. I don't want to go later than that with the lines. Okay. Well, I appreciate that. Again, thanks so much. You're saying a lot to me that you're here. And I think it is difficult to do those right things for our kids, but just like the kids can get better, we can get better. I hope you look at it that way. I'm trying every day with my kids. So any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you very much. One of the things that you had on the last slide was asking your kid about what their goals are. And I think that's an interesting question. I'm curious in your interpretation of some of the other coaches. Is that really relevant information for a parent to have? It's their goals. It's not giving more fodder to criticism. Or, I'm just curious because it's their goal, their goals.
Right. And so the reason that can be valuable is that if we're supporting our kids with our goals for them in mind and it doesn't align with their goals, then we're in trouble. So one practice that can be, I mean, some of the kids as they get older, they'll do a detailed goal setting session with their coach. They'll review it again mid-season. Sometimes those goals change. They're talking about long-term and green goals all the way down to daily and weekly goals for those improvements. And we're probably not getting to that daily and weekly goal idea, but we do want to have a sense of, do they really honestly deep down have those aspirations to be at the highest level? When we do goal sheets with the kids, we get, you know, a USC team or US snowboard team on a long-term goal with just about everyone. Some really deeply are committed to that idea, some aren't. Some catch it later. They don't all have to have it at 12 years old. But having a sense of that can help me as a parent now. But as a parent, I'm not the coach. But I can support it in a different, I can support them in a different way. It can help when we're making the decision about a summer camp. It can help when we're making the decision about equipment, that type of thing. So maybe a simpler way to do it is, and I have not done this, but I've heard some people talk about it. I'm thinking about doing it with my kids. They're 11 and 10, so they're not, you know, their goal setting is just starting to be something that they do. Take out a note card, write down 3 goals that you have for their kid for their participation sport. Have them write down 3 goals that they have for their participation sport, and say, we're going to compare these, and then just have a conversation. So I think it can help, but you're right. With that information, we don't put the coach hat on. But I do. I appreciate from my father. He helped keep me, and I didn't have dry land right here that I could do each day with the coaches. He helped keep me on that conditioning. It was tough. He did it in a supportive way. It helped, and that was to help me achieve those goals. Any other questions? I'll stick around if you've got any individually. Again, thanks for your time, and good luck this season.